Section 5.5 Conclusion. In summary, Jesus' perspective on angels provides a cohesive framework that bridges the Old and New Testaments. Angels, in this view, can be understood as entities or functions so perfectly aligned with God's will that their actions are indistinguishable from His divine purpose. These messengers appear in various forms, from human intermediaries to expressions of the divine, highlighting their role as instruments of God's active will. Whether one interprets these angelic actions as the work of distinct beings or as symbolic representations of God's intentions, the outcome remains consistent. They faithfully fulfill the divine mission. Jesus acknowledges the broader watcher tradition, affirming that each messenger serves a specific role within God's plan. This acknowledgement implicitly supports the practice of naming or identifying these roles, as it clarifies their distinct purposes. However, Jesus remains firmly anchored in the Old Testament understanding of angels, steering clear of the mystical and speculative interpretations that developed over the 5 centuries between the Persian occupation and his earthly ministry. This distinction aligns with the New Testament's caution against overly individualizing or venerating these messengers, which risks misdirecting focus away from God as the ultimate source of authority and action. Colossians chapter 2 verse 18. Let no man beguile you of your reward in a voluntary humility and worshipping of angels, intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. For Paul to address this matter, it suggests that such an issue must have been present within the church. Interestingly, in the book of Revelation, John himself momentarily exhibits an act of reverence toward an angel, an action for which he is promptly reprimanded. This incident highlights the tension between the recognition of angelic authority as messengers of God and the danger of misdirected worship, emphasizing the importance of keeping God as the sole focus of devotion. Revelation chapter 22 verses 8 to 9. And 1 John saw these things, and heard them. And when I had heard and seen, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel which showed me these things. Then saith he unto me, See thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren the prophets, and of them which keep the sayings of this book, worship God. In this verse, the angel identifies itself as a fellow servant alongside John, explicitly stating that it is not to be worshipped. This raises an intriguing question. Where, then, do humans rank within the framework of angelology? The answer largely depends on the specific verses one references, as Scripture offers varying perspectives on the relationship between humans and angels, their roles, and their respective places in God's divine order. Psalm chapter 8 verses 4 to 5. What is man, that thou art mindful of him? And the Son of man, that thou visitest him? For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 3. Know ye not that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? Does humanity rank below the angels, or are humans destined to judge them? This question arises from a passage in 1 Corinthians, which, in its full context, addresses the issue of Christians taking disputes against one another to secular courts rather than resolving them within the church community. Paul urges believers to embody their spiritual identity by resolving disputes internally, reflecting unity and maturity within their fellowship. The reference to judging angels appears as part of a broader call for believers to recognize their exalted role in God's plan. However, the exact nature of the angels being judged, whether celestial beings or symbolic representations of authority, is not fully elaborated upon in the text. For the sake of argument, let us assume the passage refers to celestial beings. Some interpret this to mean that humanity currently exists below the angels, but will, at the end of time, judge them and ultimately be elevated above them. This perspective aligns with the idea that redeemed humanity, as heirs with Christ, will participate in the final judgment, even over spiritual beings. Yet, this interpretation encounters a potential tension with Jesus' statement that, in the resurrection, humans will become like the angels, which does not explicitly imply superiority but rather a parallel existence. This complexity highlights the challenges in constructing a literal hierarchy between angels and humanity. Celestial angels, as described in Scripture, serve as ministers of God's will, distinct from humanity yet intricately connected to the divine plan. Humans, while created in God's image and endowed with unique responsibilities, are still subject to the constraints of mortality and sin until the resurrection. Ultimately, what holds the most significance is the verse that follows Paul's statement about judging angels. The passage shifts its focus to the present conduct of believers, emphasizing the importance of living in a manner that reflects their spiritual calling. This suggests that the central point is less about the future hierarchy of humanity and angels and more about the responsibility of Christians to embody their identity as God's people here and now, pursuing justice, unity, and spiritual maturity within their community. Hebrews chapter 1 verses 4-8. Being made so much better than the angels, as he hath by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. For unto which of the angels said he at any time, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee? And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And again, when he bringeth in the first begotten into the world, he saith, And let all the angels of God worship him. And of the angels he saith, Who maketh his angels spirits, and his ministers a flame of fire. But unto the Son he saith, Thy throne, O God, is for ever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of thy kingdom. In this passage, Jesus is depicted as being exalted above the angels, with God addressing him as his Son and declaring, Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. This powerful statement affirms not only Jesus' supremacy over the angels, but also his divine nature, as God himself refers to him as God. Consequently, Jesus cannot be understood merely as a function of God or an emissary. He is, in fact, God incarnate. To illustrate the broader implications of this, allow me to present a hypothetical scenario and my reflections on it. Imagine you are walking to your car when someone approaches you and asks, Can I talk to you for a moment? You agree, and the person begins, I want to talk to you about ultra-terrestrial beings. Curious but skeptical, you ask, Do you mean aliens? They respond, No, ultra-terrestrials exist in alternate dimensions described by theoretical physics. These dimensions coexist with our own but are typically invisible or inaccessible to human perception. Some of these dimensions may harbor beings who, while imperceptible to us, occasionally leave traces of their presence, manifesting as unexplained phenomena. These beings, often described as large lizard-like creatures, influence global events behind the scenes. If such an interaction occurred outside a local convenience store, how would you respond? Would you assume the individual is mentally unwell? Would you attempt to connect their theory to angels, despite its divergence from traditional angelology? Or might you wonder if they were under some kind of spiritual or psychological influence? Likely, your skepticism would stem from the absence of objective evidence supporting their claims. Yet, upon reflecting, you might realize that explaining angels in the manner many Western fundamentalist Christians do, through a strictly literal lens, might strike others as similarly bizarre and disconnected from empirical reality. This raises an important question. How should we approach such ideas? Perhaps the key lies in examining their symbolic meaning. These, ultra-terrestrial lizard men, and fears of global control could symbolize deeper anxieties, an apprehension about unseen forces shaping the world's ideologies and its ultimate destiny. On this level, common ground emerges. It is universally acknowledged that ideas, ideologies, and intangible forces profoundly shape human history and individual lives. Symbolism, as a vehicle for these truths, transcends cultural boundaries and endures long after literal interpretations fade from memory. A literal belief in angels undeniably reinforces faith in divine protection and affirms the reality of unseen spiritual realms. Yet, an obsessive focus on angelic encounters risks fostering unhealthy spiritual dependencies, detracting from personal responsibility, or promoting superstition. Conversely, reducing angels to mere symbols or earthly messengers strips away the active reality of the spiritual realm, potentially leaving people feeling isolated, alienated, or even despairing in their search for meaning. After weighing these perspectives, I offer a simple yet integrative understanding of angels. Angels can be viewed as either purely spiritual beings or, in certain contexts, as human beings fulfilling divine functions. These beings so perfectly embody God's will that their actions are often indistinguishable from God's own, making it challenging to perceive them as distinct entities. Nevertheless, angels retain unique characteristics, such as their joy and curiosity. As Jesus, who is above the angels, tells us, humanity will one day become like them, not elevated above them, but functioning as perfect reflections of God's will. In this way, humans will embody divine purpose so fully that they, too, will be indistinguishable in function, yet retain their individuality. Considering these contemplations, I advocate for a balanced perspective that appreciates both the functional and symbolic dimensions of angels, while remaining open to the possibility of a literal interpretation that may be revealed in time. This approach allows us to understand angels as instruments of God's perfect will, without diminishing the unique identity or the supremacy of divine authority. Until the day comes when angels or beings from other dimensions manifest themselves in a tangible and unmistakable manner, I will continue to uphold this moderate stance, leaning slightly toward a symbolic interpretation. Ultimately, our aim is to become perfect vessels for God's will, trusting that the true nature of angels, and their role in God's creation, will be fully revealed in due course.